Elena Martinez had been at Whitmore Air Force Base for 8 years, and in those 8 years, she'd learned to disappear. Not in the dramatic way that combat pilots vanished into cloud cover, but in the quiet, systematic way that logistics officers became part of the furniture. She arrived at 0500 every morning, 2 hours before her shift, and stayed until the last transport was accounted for. Her desk sat in the corner of the supply warehouse, surrounded by towering shelves of aircraft, parts, and maintenance equipment. At 36, Elena had the kind of steady competence that kept an entire base running smoothly. She knew every serial number, every delivery schedule, every maintenance window. When a mechanic needed a specific bolt for an F-16, Elena could locate it in under 2 minutes. When a pilot complained about faulty instrumentation, Elena had already ordered the replacement parts before the work order was filed. But what nobody knew, what Elena kept locked away in a filing cabinet behind her desk, was that she spent every free moment studying flight manuals. Not the basic ones that everyone skimmed through in training, but advanced avionics guides, tactical maneuvering protocols, and classified maintenance procedures that crossed her desk daily. She'd memorized the technical specifications of every aircraft on base, from the aging C-130 transports to the sleek F-22 Raptors that screamed overhead during training exercises. This morning started like any other. Elena was reviewing the weekly maintenance schedule when Lieutenant Commander Hawkins entered the warehouse, his polished boots clicking against the concrete floor. Behind him trailed his usual entourage, Lieutenant Rebecca Walsh, a fresh-faced pilot who'd earned her wings 6 months ago, and Sergeant Mike Torres, the base's golden boy who could do no wrong in Hawkins's eyes. Martinez, Hawkins called out, not bothering to approach her desk. "We need those hydraulic components for the Raptor maintenance by 1400. Think you can handle that, or should I assign someone more reliable?" Elena looked up from her computer screen, her expression neutral. "The parts arrived yesterday, sir. They're already staged in Bay 7, labeled and ready for installation. Maintenance Chief Rodriguez signed off on them at 0800. Walsh rolled her eyes. "Show off," she muttered, loud enough for Elena to hear. "Actually," Elena continued, her voice calm and professional, "I noticed the requisition form for next week's deliveries has an error. The part number for the avionics upgrade doesn't match the aircraft model. If we don't correct it now, we'll have a 2-week delay on the entire squadron's readiness schedule." Hawkins' jaw tightened. He didn't like being corrected, especially not by a logistics officer who'd never seen combat. "I'll be the judge of what needs correcting, Martinez. Just stick to your inventory sheets." Elena saved her work and stood up, walking to the filing cabinet. She pulled out a manila folder and opened it on her desk. "Sir, I've cross-referenced the maintenance schedules with the delivery timelines. If we don't address this discrepancy..." "Enough!" Hawkins's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. "You're a supply clerk, Martinez. You count screws and order spare parts. You don't make strategic decisions about aircraft readiness. That's why you're stuck in this warehouse instead of flying with real pilots." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant hum of the air conditioning system. Torres shifted uncomfortably, and even Walsh seemed to sense that something had shifted in the air. Elena closed the folder slowly, her fingers steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "Understood, sir," she said quietly. As Hawkins and his group left, Elena remained standing by her desk, staring at the closed folder. Inside were copies of every flight simulation record she'd ever achieved, every advanced training certificate she'd earned on her own time, every recommendation letter from instructors who'd seen her potential. Also tucked away was a letter she'd received 3 weeks ago, a letter with a NATO seal that Hawkins knew nothing about. Elena had been invisible for 8 years, but being invisible had its advantages. People didn't notice when you stayed late to use the flight simulators. They didn't ask questions when you volunteered for every advanced training program that came through the base. And they certainly didn't expect you to have connections that reached far beyond the chain of command. She sat back down at her desk and opened her computer, pulling up the maintenance schedule. Then, almost as an afterthought, she opened another window and began typing an email to Lieutenant Colonel Anderson at NATO Joint Operations Command. The subject line read, "Ready for Phase 2. Elena had spent 8 years learning to be invisible. Now it was time to disappear completely and reappear exactly where no one expected her to be. 3 days after the warehouse incident, Elena arrived at work to find her access card had been deactivated. She stood at the entrance to the supply warehouse, watching the red light blink mockingly on the card reader. A line of maintenance crews waited behind her, their morning coffee growing cold as they watched her repeatedly swipe the card that had worked perfectly for 8 years. Having trouble, Martinez? Lieutenant Walsh appeared beside her, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Maybe you should try the visitor's entrance. You know, where the civilians go. Elena stepped aside, allowing Walsh to swipe her own card. The door clicked open immediately. There must be a system error, Elena said evenly. I'll check with security. Oh, there's no error, Walsh said, holding the door open but not moving aside. To let Elena through. Commander Hawkins issued new security protocols yesterday. Apparently there were concerns about unauthorized personnel accessing sensitive areas. The maintenance crew behind them shuffled their feet, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Sergeant First Class Davis, a 20-year veteran who'd worked with Elena on countless supply runs, stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, Sergeant. Martinez has clearance for this area. She's been running supply operations here for New protocols, Davis, Walsh interrupted. Take it up with the commander if you have a problem with security measures. Elena watched Walsh disappear into the warehouse, then turned to Davis. It's fine, Sergeant. I'll sort this out. But as Elena walked across the base toward the administrative building, she noticed other changes. The keypads on the supply depot had been reprogrammed. Her parking space, the one she'd used for 8 years, now had a sign reserving it for essential personnel only. Her name had been removed from the duty roster in the main hallway. In the administrative office, Eleanor found herself sitting across from Captain Morrison, the base's personnel officer. Morrison looked uncomfortable as he shuffled through paperwork. I'm sorry, Sergeant Martinez. The access restriction came down from Commander Hawkins directly. He's concerned about operational security. Captain, I've had top-secret clearance for 8 years. My record is spotless. What specific security concern? He didn't specify, Morrison said quickly, but he did mention that your recent performance has been concerning. Apparently, you've been overstepping your authority, making decisions outside your purview. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. What decisions? Morrison consulted his notes, questioning maintenance schedules, attempting to override requisition procedures, challenging command decisions in front of other personnel. He looked up at her with something that might have been sympathy. Look, Elena, I've known you for years. This doesn't seem like you, but Hawkins is building a case that you're becoming a liability. A liability for doing my job? For doing more than your job, Morrison corrected, for acting like you're qualified to make decisions that are above your pay grade. Elena left the administrative building with her access temporarily restored, but the message was clear. Stay in your lane or lose your place entirely. As she walked back to the warehouse, she passed the flight line where Torres was conducting a pre-flight inspection on an F-22. He waved casually, oblivious to the storm brewing around Elena's career. That evening, Elena stayed late again, but this time she wasn't alone. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the maintenance chief, found her in the warehouse at 2100 hours. Elena, what's really going on? Rodriguez asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Hawkins has been asking questions about your work habits, your access patterns, your interactions with other personnel.
I think he wants me gone, Chief. Why? You're the best logistics officer this base has ever had. Hell, you know more about aircraft systems than half the pilots flying them. Elena looked at Rodriguez carefully. He was old school Air Force. Someone
who'd earned his stripes through competence rather than politics. Can I ask you something off the record? Shoot. If someone hypothetically had the qualifications to fly, all the training, all the certifications, but was blocked from doing so because of politics, what would you advise them to do? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Hypothetically? I'd say that person should remember that the Air Force is bigger than any one base and bigger than any one commander. Sometimes you have to go around obstacles instead of through them. Even if it means career suicide, Eleanor, some things are worth the risk. And some people are meant to fly, whether or not their current assignment reflects that. After Rodriguez left, Elena opened her laptop and typed a message to Lieutenant Colonel Anderson. Situation escalating. Ready to proceed with transfer authorization. The response came back within an hour. Authorization approved. Report to Andrews, AFB, Monday, 800 for final certification. Your new assignment begins immediately upon completion. Eleanor printed the message, folded it carefully, and placed it in her desk drawer. Tomorrow, she would submit a formal request for a transfer to NATO Joint Operations Command. She would follow proper channels, do everything by the book. But tonight, she had one more email to send. This one went to the base commander, Colonel Williams, Hawkins's superior. The subject line read, Request for formal review of discriminatory actions. Elena had been playing defense for 8 years. Now it was time to go on the offensive. The meeting was set for 0800 in Conference Room A, the windowless box where careers went to die. Elena arrived 10 minutes early, her service record file tucked under her arm, her uniform pressed to perfection. She'd barely slept, but her hands were steady as she arranged her documentation on the conference table. Commander Hawkins entered at exactly 0800, followed by Captain Morrison and, surprisingly, Lieutenant Walsh. Elena's pulse quickened. This wasn't a routine personnel meeting. This was an ambush. Sergeant Martinez, Hawkins began, not bothering, to sit down. It's come to my attention that you've been making unauthorized communications with personnel outside this base. Specifically, you've been discussing classified maintenance procedures with individuals who don't have proper clearance. Elena's blood turned to ice. Sir, I need to see the specific allegations. Lieutenant Walsh, please read the charges. Walsh opened a folder with theatrical precision. On Tuesday, November 14th, Sergeant Martinez was observed discussing F-22 avionics systems with unauthorized personnel in the base commissary. On Wednesday, November 15th, she was found accessing flight simulation software after hours without proper authorization. On Thursday, November 16th, she attempted to override established maintenance protocols without approval from her chain of command. Elena felt the room spinning slightly. Every charge was technically accurate, but stripped of context. The unauthorized personnel in the commissary was a visiting Air National Guard mechanic she'd helped troubleshoot a parts shortage. The flight simulation software was available to all personnel for educational purposes. The maintenance protocol override was her attempt to prevent a 2-week delay in aircraft readiness. Sir, Elena said, her voice steady despite the chaos in
her chest. I can provide context for each of these incidents. Context doesn't change the facts, Hawkins interrupted.
You've been operating outside your authority, Martinez. You've been acting like you're qualified for positions you'll never hold. It's time to face reality. Elena looked at the 3 faces across from her. Morrison seemed uncomfortable, avoiding. Eye contact. Walsh looked triumphant. Hawkins looked like a man who'd finally cornered a troublesome rat. What reality is that, sir? That you're 36 years old, stuck in a dead-end logistics position, and you'll never be anything more than a supply clerk. All your little fantasies about flying, about being a pilot, they're just that, fantasies. You're not pilot material, Martinez. You never were. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd heard variations of this speech in her head for years, but hearing it spoken aloud in an official setting with witnesses present was devastating. Furthermore, Hawkins continued, I am recommending you for immediate transfer to a ground-based position at a non-flight facility, somewhere your delusions of grandeur won't interfere with actual military operations. Elena stared at the table, her vision blurring slightly. 8 years of perfect service, 8 years of excellence, 8 years of being the best at what she did. And it all came down to this moment in a windowless room with 3 people who'd already decided her fate. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Hawkins asked. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time in 8 years, she let him see exactly what she was thinking. Yes, sir? I do. She reached into her file folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is my formal request for transfer to NATO Joint Operations Command, effective immediately.
I submitted it to Colonel Williams yesterday afternoon. Hawkins's face went pale. You can't. I can, sir. And I did. Elena stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. You see, while you were building your case against me, I was building my
case for me. Every flight simulation I completed, every advanced training certificate I earned, every commendation from maintenance chiefs and visiting officers who appreciated my work, all of it went into my NATO application. Walsh leaned forward. You can't just transfer to NATO, that's not how it works. Elena turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Actually, Lieutenant, that's exactly how it works when you have the qualifications they need and the recommendations they trust. Funny thing about being invisible for 8 years. You learn to build relationships outside your immediate chain of command. She placed another document on the table. This is my acceptance letter from Lieutenant Colonel Anderson at Joint Operations. Command, I report to Andrews Air Force Base on Monday for final certification. Hawkins grabbed the letter, scanning it quickly. This can't be legitimate. I assure you it is, sir. NATO Joint Operations Command is very interested in experienced logistics officers who also happen to be qualified pilots, especially ones who've been conducting advanced training on their own initiative. Elena gathered her papers and stood to leave. Oh, and Commander, you might want to check your facts before you accuse someone of unauthorized activities. Everything I did was within regulations, and I have the documentation to prove it. As she reached the door, she turned back one final time. You were right about one thing, sir. I was never meant to be just a supply clerk. I was meant to fly. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving 3 very quiet people in a very small room. Eleanor's apartment had always been sparse, but now it looked like a command center. Flight manuals covered every surface, her laptop displayed. Multiple windows of NATO training protocols, and her kitchen table was buried under maintenance certifications and pilot qualification records. She had 72 hours to prepare for the most important evaluation of her life. The phone rang at 600 Saturday morning. Elena answered on the second ring, expecting it to be Lieutenant Colonel Anderson with last-minute instructions. Instead, she heard a familiar voice. Elena? It's Rodriguez. We need to talk. 20 minutes later, Elena opened her door to find not just Rodriguez, but Sergeant Davis and Technical Sergeant Jennifer Hayes from the avionics shop. They looked like conspirators, gathering for a secret meeting. What's going on, Chief? Elena asked, stepping aside to let them in. Rodriguez looked around her apartment, taking in the chaos of preparation materials. "Holy hell, Elena! You weren't kidding about being ready to fly." "Word's getting around the base," Davis said. "About your transfer, about NATO, about what happened. In that meeting with Hawkins, people are talking." Hayes, who rarely spoke above a whisper, stepped forward.
"Elena, I need to tell you something. Hawkins tried to get me to sign a statement saying you'd mishandled classified maintenance documents. He wanted me to say you'd been showing them to people who didn't have clearance." Elena felt her stomach
"Drop. What did you tell him?" "I told him to go to hell," Hayes said with surprising vehemence. "But Elena, he's not done. He's calling in favors, trying to get people to back his version of events. He's scared." "Scared of what?" Rodriguez sat down heavily in Elena's desk chair. "He's scared that you're going to make him look like the petty tyrant he is. Think about it. If you succeed with NATO, if you actually become a pilot, it proves that every time he told you that you weren't qualified, he was wrong. And if he was wrong about you, what else has he been wrong about?" Elena sank onto her couch, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation. "So what do I do?" "You pass that evaluation," Davis said firmly. "You become the pilot you were meant to be, and you prove that competence matters more than politics." "But what if I can't? What if I'm not as ready as I think I am?" Hayes pulled out a thick folder from her bag. "These are the real maintenance records for every aircraft on this base for the past 3 years, the ones that show every time Hawkins overrode safety protocols to meet training schedules, every time he pushed aircraft beyond recommended limits, every time he put politics ahead of safety." Elena stared at the folder. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because if Hawkins tries to sabotage your NATO transfer, you'll need leverage," Rodriguez said. "And because we've all seen what happens when good people stay quiet about bad leadership." That afternoon, Elena drove to a small airfield an hour outside the base. She'd been coming here for 2 years, paying for private flight lessons with a retired Air Force colonel named Jack Stevens. Stevens had flown everything from fighters to cargo planes during his 30-year career, and he'd been Elena's secret weapon in maintaining her flight skills. "So," Stevens said as they walked toward a small Cessna 172, "Monday's the big day." "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. But Elena, I've been flying for 40 years and I've trained."
"A lot of pilots. You have something that can't be taught. You have instincts."
"The way you handle emergency procedures, the way you adapt to changing conditions, the way you think 3 steps ahead, that's not something you learn in a classroom." They spent the next 3 hours in the air, with Stevens throwing every scenario he could think of at Elena. Emergency landings, navigation failures, weather changes, system malfunctions. Elena handled each one with the calm precision that had made her exceptional at logistics work. "You know what your real advantage is?" Stevens said as they taxied back to the hangar. "You've spent 8 years learning how aircraft work from the inside out. Most pilots know how to fly, but they don't really understand what makes their aircraft tick. You understand both sides of the equation." That evening, Elena sat at her kitchen table, reviewing her NATO acceptance letter for the 100th time. The official language was bureaucratic and formal, but buried in the 3rd paragraph was a line that made her heart race every time she read it. "Upon successful completion of certification, candidate will be assigned to International Rapid Response Squadron, specializing in joint operations and advanced tactical missions." She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. "Anderson here. Colonel, this is Sergeant Martinez." "Elena, are you ready for Monday?" "I think so, sir. But I need to ask you something. If I pass the evaluation, what happens to my current assignment?" There was a pause. "Your current commanding officer will be notified of your transfer to NATO Command. Your new assignment will be classified, but I can tell you that you'll be working with some of the most advanced aircraft in the world." Elena felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Including the Rafale?" "Among others." "Elena, I want you to understand something. The position you're being considered for isn't just about flying. It's about being part of a team that operates beyond national boundaries, beyond traditional command structures. You'll be representing not just the United States Air Force, but the entire Allied coalition." "I understand, sir." "Good. Get some rest. Monday starts early." Elena hung up the phone and looked around her apartment one more time. In 72 hours, her entire life would change. She'd either prove that 8 years of preparation had been worth it, or she'd crash and burn in the most spectacular way possible. Either way, she'd finally know what she was truly capable of. Andrews Air Force Base at 0400 hours was a different world than the sleepy logistics warehouse where Eleanor had spent the last 8 years. The flight line buzzed with activity as maintenance crews prepared aircraft for the day's operations. Eleanor stood in the pre-dawn darkness, her flight bag slung over her shoulder, watching F-16s and F-22s taxi toward the runway. "Sergeant Martinez?" Elena turned to see a tall woman in flight gear approaching. The name tag read Captain Torres. No relation to the Torres from Whitmore, but the coincidence made Elena's stomach tighten. "That's me, ma'am. I'm your evaluation officer today. I understand you've been preparing for this opportunity for quite some time." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Her throat felt dry despite the 3 cups of coffee she'd consumed during the 2-hour drive to Andrews. "Before we get started, I want you to know that I've reviewed your file. Your maintenance background is impressive, and your simulation scores are exceptional. But simulation isn't reality, and today we're going to find out if you have what it takes to handle the real thing." They walked toward a sleek aircraft that took Elena's breath away. The Rafale fighter jet sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting to strike. Elena had studied every technical manual, memorized every system specification, but seeing the actual aircraft was overwhelming. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Captain Torres said. "Twin-engine, fly-by-wire, capable of both air-to-air and air-to-ground."
Missions. Today we're going to see if you can handle her. The next 2 hours were a blur of technical briefings, system checks, and emergency procedures. Elena felt her confidence growing as she demonstrated her knowledge of the aircraft's systems.
This was information she'd been absorbing for years, and it flowed out of her naturally. "Impressive," Torres said as Elena completed the final pre-flight inspection. "Most candidates struggle with the avionics integration, but you handled it like you've been flying Rafales for years." "I've been studying them for years, ma'am. Every technical manual, every maintenance bulletin, every system upgrade. We'll see if that translates to actual flight performance. Suit up." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she pulled on the flight suit, but her breathing was steady. This was the moment she'd been working toward for 8 years. As she climbed into the cockpit, she felt a strange sense of coming home. The takeoff was smooth, and Elena quickly settled into the rhythm of flying the Rafale. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision, and she found herself grinning inside her helmet as they climbed to altitude. "All right, Martinez." Torres' voice came through the radio. "Let's start with some basic maneuvers. Show me a barrel roll." Elena executed the maneuver flawlessly, the horizon spinning around her as the Rafale carved through the air. The G-forces pressed her into her seat, but she felt exhilarated rather than overwhelmed. "Nice. Now let's try something more challenging. I'm going to simulate a system failure. Your hydraulics are compromised and you're losing altitude. Show me how you handle it." Elena's training kicked in immediately. She adjusted her flight controls, modified her approach angle, and managed the simulated emergency with calm precision. In the back of her mind, she could hear Commander Hawkins' voice. telling her she wasn't pilot material, but the aircraft beneath her wings told a different story. "Outstanding," Torres said. "Your emergency procedures are textbook perfect, but textbook isn't always enough. Let's see how you handle the unexpected." What followed was an hour of the most challenging flying Elena had ever experienced. Torres threw scenario after scenario at her: equipment failures, weather emergencies, navigation problems, fuel limitations. Each time, Elena adapted and overcame, drawing on her deep understanding of aircraft systems and her years of preparation. "Final test," Torres announced as they headed back toward Andrews. "I want you to perform a low-level flyby of Whitmore Air. Force base. It's on our flight path, and it'll give you a chance to show off your precision flying skills." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. Whitmore Base, her base. Where Commander Hawkins was probably starting his morning routine, completely unaware that the supply clerk he'd tried to destroy was about to fly over his head in one of the most advanced
Fighter jets in the world. Copy that, Captain. Heading for Whitmore Base. As they approached the familiar airspace, Elena felt a surge of emotion. Below her, she could see the warehouse where she'd spent 8 years counting inventory and filing requisitions.
She could see the flight line where she'd watched other pilots take off while she remained grounded. She could see the administrative building where Hawkins had tried to end her career. "Whitmore Base, this is Rafael Flight 237 requesting permission for low-level flyby," Elena announced over the radio. The response crackled back immediately. "Rafael Flight 237, negative on flyby. We have no Rafales scheduled for this area." Elena smiled inside her helmet. "Whitmore Base, this is Sergeant Elena Martinez, call sign Silver Eagle, flying under NATO Joint Operations Command."
"I am authorized for this flyby. Please confirm." There was a long pause. Elena could imagine the confusion in the control tower, the frantic checking of schedules, the growing realization that someone they dismissed as a supply clerk was currently
piloting a multi-million-dollar fighter jet over their base. "Sergeant Martinez, is that really you?" "It's me, Whitmore Base. Request permission to show you what I've been training for." "Permission granted. You are cleared for low-level flyby." Elena banked the Rafale into a perfect approach, the aircraft slicing through the air with graceful precision. As she flew over the base at 500 feet, she could see people running out of buildings, pointing up at the sky, shading their eyes to get a better look at the jet screaming overhead.
"How was that, Captain?" Elena asked as they climbed away from the base. "That," Torres said, "was the flying of someone who belongs in a cockpit." "Welcome to NATO Joint Operations Command, Lieutenant Martinez." "Lieutenant, your promotion comes with..."
"The assignment? Congratulations, Elena. You've earned it." As they flew back to Andrews, Elena felt tears streaming down her face inside her helmet. 8 years of preparation, 8 years of being told she wasn't qualified, 8 years of being invisible, and now she was exactly where she belonged, 30,000 feet above the world that had tried to keep her grounded. The phone in Commander Hawkins' office started ringing at 09:45 hours and didn't stop. Elena's flyby had been witnessed by half the base, and word was spreading through the ranks like wildfire. The supply clerk, who'd been dismissed as a fantasist, had just performed a flawless aerial demonstration in a NATO fighter jet. "Sir, you need to see this," Lieutenant Walsh burst into Hawkins' office, her face pale. She held up her phone, showing a video that one of the maintenance crew had posted on social media. The Rafale was clearly visible, banking gracefully over the base, the sound of its engines echoing off the buildings. Hawkins watched the video 3 times, his jaw tightening with each viewing. "This proves nothing," he said finally. "Anyone can ride in a fighter jet, Passengers fly in military aircraft all the time. Sir, the radio chatter is all over the base. She identified herself as the pilot. And Walsh swallowed hard. She used a call sign. Silver Eagle. The implications hit Hawkins like a physical blow. Call signs weren't given to passengers or observers. They were earned by pilots who'd proven themselves in combat-ready aircraft. If Elena had a call sign, it meant she was a certified pilot with an active mission status. "Get me Colonel Williams on the phone," Hawkins said quietly. The conversation with his superior was brief and uncomfortable. Colonel Williams had already been contacted by NATO Joint Operations Command, informing him of Elena's transfer and commending her exceptional performance during certification. He'd also received several calls from other personnel on the base, asking about the circumstances surrounding Eleanor's departure. "Tom," Colonel Williams said, using Hawkins' first name, in a tone that suggested this was not a friendly conversation.
"I need to understand what happened with Sergeant Martinez."
NATO called her transfer urgent and mentioned that she'd been operating under adverse conditions at her previous assignment. Hawkins felt sweat beading on his forehead. "Sir, I was simply maintaining discipline and ensuring proper chain of command. I've been reviewing the documentation you submitted regarding Martinez's performance issues. It's interesting reading. You claim she was insubordinate and exceeded her authority, but I've also been reviewing her actual performance records. 8 years of exceptional ratings, multiple commendations, and not a single disciplinary action on her record. Sir, her recent behavior, Williams interrupted, appears to have been preparing for a NATO assignment that she obtained through her own initiative and qualifications. An assignment that reflects very well on this base and
on the Air Force as a whole, unless there's something you're not telling me." Hawkins realized he was trapped.
Any attempt to further discredit Elena would now look like sour grapes, or worse, like deliberate obstruction of a valuable asset. "No, sir. I may have misunderstood the scope of her activities, I see. Well, I think we need to have a longer conversation about this situation." My office. 1 hour. After hanging up, Hawkins sat in his chair, staring at the wall. In the span of a few hours, his carefully constructed narrative about Elena's inadequacy had crumbled. Worse, he was beginning to realize that several people on the base had been documenting his treatment of Elena, and those records would not paint him in a favorable light. Meanwhile, at Andrews Air Force Base, Elena was completing her final briefings as a newly minted NATO pilot. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson handed her a folder containing her new assignment details. "You'll be stationed at Ramstein Air Base in Germany," Anderson explained. "Your squadron specializes in rapid response missions across Europe and the Mediterranean. You'll be flying everything from reconnaissance to tactical support, working with pilots from 6 different nations." Elena flipped through the assignment papers, hardly believing what she was reading. "Sir, this is exactly what I've been training for. I know your background in logistics gives you a unique perspective on air operations. You understand the entire supply chain from maintenance to mission execution. That's exactly what we need for joint operations." "What about my previous assignment, Commander Hawkins?" Anderson's expression hardened slightly. "Your former commander is currently having a conversation with his superior about his personnel management practices. I suspect he's learning that talented people don't appear out of nowhere. They're developed through proper leadership and support. When you try to suppress talent instead of nurturing it, you end up losing valuable assets to organizations that know how to recognize potential." Eleanor felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. She'd gotten what she wanted, but at the cost of burning bridges with her former unit. "I hope I didn't cause too much trouble." "Elena, you didn't cause trouble. You revealed trouble that already existed. There's a difference. That afternoon, Elena received a call from Master Sergeant Rodriguez. "Elena, I just wanted to tell you that the whole maintenance crew watched you fly over the base today. We were all cheering. Hell, even some of the pilots were impressed. How's everyone taking the news? Mixed reactions. The people who actually work with you are proud as hell. The people who, well, let's just say that Hawkins is having a bad day. Word is that Colonel Williams is conducting a full review of his command decisions." Elena felt a pang of guilt. "I never wanted to hurt anyone's career." "Eleanor, you didn't hurt anyone's career, you saved your own, and you showed a lot of people on this base that excellence doesn't always come from the obvious places. You've got kids in logistics now talking about flight training, mechanics asking about pilot programs. You've inspired people. I just wanted to fly. I know, but sometimes when you reach for what you want, you show other people that it's possible for them too. That's not a bad thing." After ending the call, Elena walked to the window of her temporary quarters at Andrews. Tomorrow she would fly to Germany to begin her new assignment. She'd be working with the best pilots in the world, flying missions that would test every skill she'd developed over the past 8 years. But tonight, she was thinking about the invisible people at bases around the world, the mechanics and logistics officers and technicians who kept everything running while others took the glory. She hoped that her story would reach some of them, and that they'd understand that being underestimated could be an advantage if you used it correctly. Elena had spent 8 years learning to be invisible. Now she was ready to show the world exactly what invisible people could accomplish when they finally stepped into the light. 3 weeks after Elena's transfer to NATO, the investigation into Commander Hawkins' leadership practices was complete. The conference room at Whitmore Air Force Base was packed with personnel from across the base, everyone from maintenance chiefs to junior enlisted, all summoned to hear the findings of Colonel Williams's review. Eleanor wasn't there, of course. She was 4,000 miles away at Ramstein Air Base, flying training missions over the German countryside. But her presence was felt in every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that had been gathered about her treatment. "The review has revealed several concerning patterns," Colonel Williams announced to the assembled group. "First, we found evidence of discriminatory practices in assignment opportunities and professional development. Second, there were multiple instances of retaliation against personnel who questioned established procedures. Third, and most concerning, we found evidence of deliberate suppression of personnel advancement based on personal bias rather than military necessity." Master Sergeant Rodriguez sat in the front row, watching Commander Hawkins's face grow paler with each revelation. Next to him, Technical Sergeant Hayes clutched the folder of maintenance records that had helped build the case against Hawkins's leadership. "The most egregious example," Williams continued, "involves former Sergeant Elena Martinez, now Lieutenant Martinez of NATO Joint Operations Command. Despite 8 years of exemplary service, advanced training on her own initiative, and qualifications that exceed many of our active pilots, she was systematically excluded from advancement opportunities and subjected to increasing restrictions on her duties." Lieutenant Walsh shifted uncomfortably in her seat. 3 weeks ago, she'd been part of Hawkins's inner circle. Now she was realizing how her participation in Eleanor's humiliation looked to the rest of the base. "Furthermore," Williams said, his voice growing colder, "when Sergeant Martinez attempted to pursue legitimate career advancement through proper channels, she was subjected to false accusations, trumped-up disciplinary charges, and what can only be described as harassment designed to force her resignation." The room was dead silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Everyone present had witnessed pieces of Elena's treatment, but hearing it laid out systematically was damning. "The irony," Williams continued, "is that while Commander Hawkins was building a case to remove Martinez from the Air Force entirely, she was being courted by NATO Joint Operations Command as one of the most promising pilot candidates they'd seen in years. Her performance during certification was described as exceptional, and her background in logistics and aircraft systems was considered invaluable for joint operations. Sergeant Davis raised his hand. "Sir, what's Lieutenant Martinez's current status?" Williams consulted his notes. "She's completed her initial training phase and has been assigned to Alpha Squadron, responsible for rapid response operations across European theater. Last week, she successfully completed her first solo mission, a reconnaissance flight that required navigating through challenging weather conditions over the North Sea. Her commanding officer described her performance as textbook perfect. A murmur ran through the room. The supply clerk they'd all known was now flying solo missions for NATO. "The question before us," Williams said, "is how we ensure this kind of leadership failure doesn't happen again. We lost a valuable asset not because she wasn't qualified, but because her immediate supervisor couldn't see past his own preconceptions." He turned his attention directly to Hawkins. "Commander, you have two options. You can request a transfer to a non-leadership position at another base, or you can face formal disciplinary proceedings that will likely result in your removal from the Air Force. I'll give you 24 hours to decide." After the meeting, Rodriguez found himself in the parking lot with several other NCOs who had worked closely with Elena. The mood was somber but satisfied. "I keep thinking about that last day," Sergeant Davis said, when she walked out of that meeting with her head held high. "She knew something we didn't know." "She knew she was better than how she was being treated," Hayes replied. "And she did something about it instead of just accepting it." Technical Sergeant Mills, who rarely spoke up in group settings, surprised everyone with his next comment. "My daughter's thinking about joining the Air Force. Last week I showed her the video of Elena flying over the base. I told her that's what happens when you work hard, and don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." Meanwhile, in the administrative building, Hawkins sat alone in his office, staring at his computer screen. He'd already started typing his transfer request, knowing that fighting the charges would only make things worse. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and several of his former allies had provided statements supporting the investigation's findings. His phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Walsh. "Sir, I wanted to apologize for my role in what happened to Elena. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Similar messages had been arriving all day. People who had participated in Elena's humiliation were now distancing themselves, realizing how badly they'd misjudged the situation. The base that had once seemed unified under his leadership was now questioning everything he'd told them about competence, qualifications, and who deserved respect. That evening, Rodriguez received a call from Elena herself. "Chief, I heard about the investigation results. How's everyone handling it?" "Mixed feelings," Rodriguez admitted. "People are happy you got what you deserved, but there's some guilt about not speaking up sooner." "No one should feel guilty," Elena said firmly. "Military hierarchy exists for a reason. People were following orders and staying in their lane."
"I don't blame anyone for that." "What about Hawkins?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "I feel sorry for him, actually. He was so focused on keeping people in their assigned boxes that he couldn't see potential when it was right in front of him. That's
"Not just bad leadership, it's a waste of talent that hurts everyone." "Any regrets about how things went down?" "Only one," Elena said. "I wish I'd found the courage to fight back sooner. Maybe if I had, other people wouldn't have been subjected to the same treatment. Eleanor, you fought back at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, and you inspired a lot of people here to think differently about what's possible." After hanging up, Rodriguez walked out to the flight line where he often found himself when he needed to think. A group of young airmen were working on an F-22, their tools spread out on a work cart. One of them, a logistics specialist, who'd been inspired by Elena's story, looked up as he approached. "Chief, is it true that Lieutenant Martinez knew more about aircraft systems than most of the pilots?" Rodriguez smiled. "Son, Elena Martinez knew more about aircraft systems than most of the engineers who designed them. The difference is, she also had the courage to prove it. Elena had left Whitmore Air Force Base 3 weeks ago, but her impact was still being felt. People were asking different questions, challenging assumptions, and thinking about their own potential in new ways. Sometimes the most powerful victory isn't just achieving your own dreams, it's showing others that their dreams are possible, too." 6 months later, Elena stood on the tarmac at Ramstein Air Base, watching her squadron prepare for their morning briefing. The German sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, and the sound of jet engines warming up filled the
air with familiar music.
She'd completed 12 successful missions, earned the respect of her international colleagues, and proven herself as one of the squadron's most reliable pilots. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mom, this is Airman First. Class Jessica Carter from Whitmore AFB. Master Sergeant Rodriguez gave me your contact. I'm a logistics specialist and I just wanted to thank you for showing me what's possible. I start pilot training next month." Elena smiled as she typed back, "Congratulations, Jessica. Remember, the sky doesn't care about your background, only your skill. Fly safe." It was the 15th message like this she'd received in the past month. Word of her story had spread throughout the Air Force community, inspiring mechanics, technicians, and support personnel to pursue their own aviation dreams. The invisible people were becoming visible, one pilot at a time. "Lieutenant Martinez?" Elena turned to see Captain Morrison approaching, not the personnel officer from Whitmore, but Captain Rebecca Morrison, her flight leader. "Ready for today's
Mission? Always ready, Ma'am. Good. We're escorting a diplomatic convoy through contested airspace, the kind of mission that requires precision, adaptability, and someone who understands both the technical and logistical aspects of air operations."
Sound like anyone you know? Elena grinned. "I might know someone who fits that description." As they walked toward the briefing room, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation in Commander Hawkins' conference room felt like a lifetime ago, but it had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Sometimes you had to be broken down completely before you could build yourself back up stronger. During the mission briefing, Elena learned they'd be working with a mixed squadron of American, French, and German pilots. The mission parameters were complex, requiring split-second coordination between multiple aircraft and ground support teams. It was exactly the kind of challenge she'd been training for her entire career. 3 hours later, Eleanor was 25,000 feet. Above the Mediterranean, her Rafale cutting through the clear morning air in perfect formation with 5 other fighters. The diplomatic convoy below was a line of vehicles snaking through mountain roads, vulnerable to threats from multiple directions. "Silver Eagle, this is Phoenix Leader," came the voice of the French squadron commander. "We have possible hostile movement at 2 o'clock. Can you confirm?" Elena banked her aircraft slightly, using her advanced sensor package to scan the area. Her years of studying aircraft systems paid off as she quickly identified the source of the signal. "Phoenix Leader, Silver Eagle, negative on hostile. That's a civilian radio repeater station. Coordinates match our pre-flight intelligence. Recommend maintain current heading. Copy, Silver Eagle. Your reconnaissance skills continue to impress." Elena felt a surge of pride. 6 months ago, she'd been dismissed as a supply clerk with delusions of grandeur. Now she was providing critical intelligence to an international squadron, using skills that combined her technical expertise with her hard-earned flight training. The mission concluded without incident, the convoy reaching its destination safely, while the fighter escort maintained perfect formation throughout the 6-hour operation. As they landed back at Ramstein, Elena received congratulations from pilots who'd initially been skeptical of the logistics officer turned fighter pilot. That evening, Elena video-called Master Sergeant Rodriguez at Whitmore Base. His familiar face appeared on her laptop screen, grinning broadly. "Elena, how's the NATO life treating you? Like a dream I never want to wake up from, Chief. How are things at Whitmore?" Rodriguez's expression grew more serious. Different. Better, I think. Colonel Williams brought in a new commander, someone who actually listens to people and recognizes talent regardless of their job classification. The whole culture has shifted. What about Hawkins? Transferred to a desk job at Peterson Air Force Base. No personnel responsibilities, just paperwork. Word is he's counting down the days until retirement. Elena felt a complex mix of emotions. She'd never wanted to destroy anyone's career, but she couldn't ignore the relief that other people wouldn't have to endure what she'd experienced. "Chief, I need to tell you something. Next month I'm being transferred to a special assignment. I can't give you details, but it's the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career." "Classified?" "Very. But I wanted you to know that none of this would have been possible without people like you who saw my potential and encouraged me to pursue it. Eleanor, you did this yourself. You had the vision, the determination, and the courage to fight for what you wanted. I just tried not to get in your way." After ending the call, Elena walked out to the flight line one more time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, she wanted to stand in the place where her dreams had finally taken flight. A young German mechanic was performing a post-flight inspection on her Rafale, and Elena walked over to introduce herself. "How does she look, Sergeant?" The mechanic looked up, surprised to see a pilot taking interest in the maintenance details. "Excellent condition, ma'am, but I noticed you've been requesting additional system checks that aren't in the standard protocol." Elena smiled. "Old habits. I used to be in logistics before I became a pilot. I learned that understanding every component makes you a better operator." "That's unusual. Most pilots don't want to know about the technical details." "Maybe that's because most pilots haven't spent 8 years learning that excellence comes from understanding the whole system, not just your part of it." As Elena walked back to her quarters, she thought about the supply clerk who'd been told to take off her uniform because she wasn't qualified. That woman had been invisible, underestimated, and dismissed. But she'd also been determined, prepared, and absolutely certain of her own worth. The sky had always belonged to Elena Martinez. It had just taken her 8 years to claim it. In her final email of the day, Elena wrote to Airman Carter, the young logistics specialist who was starting pilot training. "Remember, they'll try to put you in a box based on where you started. Your job is to prove that you belong wherever your skills and determination can take you. The uniform doesn't make the pilot makes the uniform. Fly high, Airman. The sky is waiting for you." Elena hit send and closed her laptop. Tomorrow, she would climb back into her Rafale and continue writing her story across the European sky. But tonight, she was content knowing that somewhere in logistics warehouses and maintenance hangars around the world, other invisible people were reading her story and planning their own flight paths to the impossible. The supply clerk had become a pilot, but more importantly, she'd become proof that being underestimated was just another form of camouflage, one that could hide your true potential until you were ready to reveal it to the world, 30,000 feet above the people who never saw it coming. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.